Still raging 26 years later, Streets of Rage 4 is a faithful revival of the classic arcade beat-em-ups. Move from left to right, punch enemies, destroy objects for points, health and weapon pickups, punch a few more enemies, and repeat. It's simple and unadventurous, and while it expands modestly on the combat with a few new skills to master, Streets of Rage 4 definitely prioritises nostalgia over any kind of big modern reinvention. The plot is wafer thin and predictably corny, but it is beautifully presented in a comic book panel style. Mr. and Miss Y, the twin offsprings of series villain Mr. X, are the big bads this time, and their evil scheme is to control the city by corrupting everything good, while looking like a couple of subpar Scott Pilgrim villains. It's all very silly, but in a knowing, not taking itself seriously kind of way, and it just about pulls it off. It's 10 years since the events of Streets of Rage 3, and series regular Axel Stone and Blaze Fielding return to fight crime again, despite likely being too old for this shit. To balance out the familiar with something different is the addition of two brand new characters, Cherry Hunter, the daughter of series stalwart Adam Hunter, and a cybernetic armed absolute unit called Floyd. Just like in the old games, each character has a special move that does a lot more damage at the cost of taking a chunk out of your own health bar. However, an added risk-reward twist for Streets of Rage 4 is that any lost health can potentially be earned back if you string a combo of standard attacks together on top of it, and any break in this combo results in the health being lost permanently. On my first playthrough, which took between 2 and 3 hours, I found myself avoiding special moves due to their risky nature. However, as I got the hang of combos, I started to use them semi-regularly in situations where I felt confident that I could earn that precious health back. It's a simple but interesting minigame, and perhaps the most important addition in progressing the Streets of Rage formula as a whole. A stronger weapon in your arsenal are the star moves. Every character's is slightly different. Axel's, for instance, is a flaming rising uppercut, while Cherry's is a Pete Townsend inspired guitar power slide, but triggering them will do huge amounts of damage to any Y Syndicate members and lucky enough to be in your path. Using them while fighting regular goons often feels unnecessary, as most situations are manageable, but they're still a fun spectacle, with Floyd's screen-dominating Unibeam being a visual favourite. Another enjoyable addition to the combat is the inclusion of the weapon catch maneuver. Throw any weapon at an enemy and, if it makes contact, it will bounce back and give you a split second to catch it and keep whacking away. Like Gears of War's active reload time button press mechanic, there's a rhythm to master, but once you've done so, it's completely rewarding. However, for every moment of feeling like a deadly ninja, there are moments that are simply unfair due to factors completely out of your control. Of the 4 starting characters, the returning duo of Axel and Blaze immediately felt familiar and fit right into place in the 90s side-scrolling beat-em-up, but they do feel a little generic at this point. They're both well-rounded fighters who don't necessarily excel in any ability, but work best as an introductory character for new players and a recognisable sight for veterans. But by contrast, Floyd and Cherry couldn't be further apart, and their movesets are by far the most exciting and fun to play. Cherry Hunter, despite carrying a guitar on her back, can move at a significant speed, which is literally a nice change of pace to the other characters, and that made her my preferred choice in my first playthrough. Her ability to sprint and weave through attacks feel more in line with what I expect a modern Streets of Rage would play like, which is also why I was initially disappointed with how sluggish the other characters felt in comparison. Floyd, for instance, is by far the slowest character, but I soon appreciated what he lacked in speed is compensated for in strength. His ability to toss enemies around like ragdolls eventually won me round and had me experimenting with different playstyles. The music sets the tone and definitely feels on brand with the iconic beats of the series, although I'd have to say in the era of game soundtracks like Hotline Miami and the recent Final Fantasy VII remake, they don't quite hit the same sort of I can't get this track out of my brain status or even its predecessors. All 12 levels predictably end in a boss fight, and for the most part, there's a good balance of variety and difficulty throughout. Most are smartly designed, with challenging attack patterns that you'll need to learn. But disappointingly, there are repeated enemies in later levels with arbitrary difficulty spikes, like here's 2 of them now. In general though, the enemies are a good mix of old and new, with neither feeling out of place despite the 26-year age gap. I played through the first time alone, but that was only half the fun. Less, even. The 2-player online co-op really shines through with the intensity and chaos increased. It also made me fully appreciate the potential character combos and the satisfaction of perfectly executing a tandem move. If you're looking for longevity, 2-player co-op is where it's at. Streets of Rage 4 also has local 4-player co-op, but due to the current isolation circumstances, I was unable to try it. Beyond the campaign and its 5 difficulty levels, Mania is exactly what it sounds like. Other options are the boss rush mode, arcade, which is basically the story mode with a consistent life count, and a PvP battle mode to mess around with. But frankly, the story mode satisfies those combat itches far better than any of these other modes, and if you're playing alone, there's little replayability on offer. One thing Streets of Rage 4 does offer, however, is a wealth of nostalgic choices, such as the retro Streets of Rage 1 and 2 soundtrack and old CRT filters. It takes a little grinding to unlock, but there's also a lifetime point system that gives access to faithfully recreated, playable characters from previous entries in the series, and there's also a modern version of Adam who unlocks during the story. These aren't just skins either, these characters have their own movesets, animations, and sound effects. Despite contrasting against the lush, cartoon-like world of Streets of Rage 4, these retro characters fit nicely into the combat loop and help reinforce how the latest installment reignites that passion for the series through nostalgia. In fact, they're so accurately recreated that annoyingly the characters from Streets of Rage 1 don't even have special moves and must solely rely on their basic star moves from the original. As a result, they feel at odds with the new risk-reward system, and it pretty much renders them unusable on the harder difficulties. In a way, this feels like a metaphor for the entire game. Instead of taking bolder steps to modernise the formula, Streets of Rage 4 sticks rigidly to the past for little more than nostalgia's sake. Streets of Rage 4 delivers the greatest hits of the classic series, and is at its best when played with friends. If the primary focus was delivering a traditional Streets of Rage experience with a modern coat of paint, then it absolutely succeeds. But while it layers on a few new and interesting mechanics, it's still a very conservative update to a quarter-century-old format that feels like a slave to the past.